Well, I've entitled the message this morning, Stepping Out in Faith. And I think from those 4 verses, it's pretty clear that's what Abram was called to do. So we just take a look at the world around us for a minute. Oftentimes, it's defined by uncertainty, by rapid change, circumstances that cause fear and anxiety in our hearts. I think there's a statistic out there, almost 20% of the population is on some type of anxiety medication. They're anxious about what the day brings, day in and day out. In our personal lives, frequently, we encounter circumstances or situations that cause us to make a decision, a choice, a move into the unknown, something that the path isn't clear. Just like here with Abram, God didn't say, get up, Abram, go to the land of Canaan. I'm going to show you this place. I'm going to take you into Egypt because there's going to be famine. He said, get up and go to the land that I will show you. Got a lot of bodies here. Has anyone ever stood on the edge of something new, something unknown? You're not really sure? Yeah. Remember the flutters, the fear and the anxiety, the butterflies in your stomach, some people would call it. I have. I'm there right now. It could have been a new job. Maybe it's a significant move to a new city. It's a big task. The weight of a difficult conversation you had to make. Sometimes those hard conversations don't come quickly, right? There's some weight on that. In those moments, we find ourselves at a crossroads, and there's a decision to be made. Do we retreat into what's familiar, what's comfortable, what's predictable? Or do we instead step out in faith into the unknown with a deep breath and fervent prayer, believing that God has something greater for us on the other side of that step? So today, we're going to dive in that step, Abram's step into faith. It's a courageous, terrifying, but ultimately liberating act of stepping out in faith. And it's more than just a phrase to step out in faith. I think it's a spiritual principle. The Bible, front to back, is full of examples where God has called someone, and they've chosen to answer the call, to lean only on God, not on their own understanding. Oftentimes it defies logic, what we would use as logic, right? We can see these stories all day long. Doesn't make sense to human. God said do it, so what they choose to do, they did it. And the text this morning kind of points to that. This is the beginning of the journey for Abram. He's stepping out. He later becomes known as Abraham. He's a father of many nations. But this is a perfect example of stepping out in faith, what it means to step out in faith. And it's a story that speaks to each one of us. It doesn't matter about our age, our demographic. It doesn't matter what circumstances you're in. Every person in this room, at some point, God is going to call to us and ask us to take a step in faith. And we have to ask ourselves, how are we going to respond? For an outline today, I'm going to share 3 observations about our text. The first one is going to be stepping out in faith means a call to leave our comfort zones. The second observation is stepping out in faith means trusting the promise, not the path. And the last one will be stepping out in faith means active obedience as opposed to passive belief. So starting at the first point, stepping out in faith means a call to leave our comfort zones. So starting here, let's just look back at Abram's life. Okay, God called him initially to leave the land of Ur and the Chaldees and go to the land of Canaan, right? He's going there. But something happened. He left with his father and his wife and his brother, and they got hung up in Haran. So now they're living in Haran. Abram's father's passed away. Probably a comfortable life. You read some text, it tells he's picked up some members since he's been there. He's got herds. He's 75 years old. For a lot of us, that's the age of retirement, right? He's really at about the halfway point in his life, so maybe just a little out of the prime. But he's settled there. He's got his family with him. He's got the familiar rhythms of life. Probably happy. At this point, he probably has a clear picture in his head of what the rest of his life is going to look like. He's anticipating it. He's already reaping the fruits of his labor. I think the hard work should be done at this point. I doubt that Abram is sitting in Haran, a prosperous city in Mesopotamia, and saying, I'm going to start a new grand adventure today. I'm just going to throw it all away and go see what happens. I don't think that's what Abram was thinking. But into his settled existence, into that calm, relaxing, comfortable life, came the powerful, unmistakable voice of God. And it shattered his expectations and gave him an unprecedented command. The Lord said to Abram, go from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I want to unpack that real quick because it sounds like a simple command, right? If you just condense it, it says, go to the land I will show you. That's not a hard set of instructions to follow. It sounds pretty simple. Go, and I'm going to show you where to go. Let's put it on us for a minute. Say I came to you, Mike. I said, Mike, I got this nice map I drew for you, right? And right here in the bottom left corner, it's got a little dot, and it says, you are here. And at the top, it says, the land I will show you. And there's nothing else on that paper. You ready to go? What condition is your life in? It's a lot. He's telling me, give it all away. Get up and leave everything you know and all the comforts you have. Get up and go. So it's a pretty stark command. And it's not just it's a direct imperative. We talked about that word in Sunday school this morning. It's an imperative. It's a command to go. It requires action. God said, go. He didn't say consider going. He didn't say think about it. He said go. There was no detailed itinerary. He didn't have a fancy drawn map like I offered Mike. There was no guarantee of immediate comfort. Sometimes when we step out in faith, there is not a guarantee of comfort. That's prosperity gospel. We will be blessed, but people that leave out the trials and the struggles that we're going to have, that's part of how we grow in God. So there are going to be trials along the way. It may not be a comfortable ride, and you're leaving comfort to anticipate the uncomfortable. That's a hard sell for me. If that's a door-to-door salesman, I might be like, no, thank you. You know what I mean? And maybe most alarming for me is that there's no named destination, no clear path. He says, get up and go to the place I'll show you. So from the very start, he's saying, you got to trust in me. What's Abram going to do? What are his options here? Pretty simple. He can stay or he can go. Everything else is in the hands of God. To the land I will show you. He didn't argue with him. He didn't negotiate. We can look at Moses. Moses did some negotiating there, I think. He didn't want more details. He didn't wait for perfect timing. Abram didn't say, hold on a second. I got to discuss this with my financial advisor. Got to make sure my affairs are in order before I go. He simply went. And this is the essence of stepping out in faith. He heard the clear call from God. He clung to his unfailing promises, and he acted in obedience. Even when the path ahead was unclear. It wasn't unknown. It was unclear. It was known to God, not to Abram. Sometimes that's hard. God knows it, but we don't. If we don't know it, we don't want to move on it. We like the certain, the guarantee. I want the easy money. Show me the proof in the pudding, and then I'll donate. Something like that. And it's a clear demonstration of trust in the Almighty God, the one who calls us, in his character, and his faithfulness, and his preeminence. I think it's interesting. If we look at this, Abram's story is our story. God often calls us to leave our comfort zones. It may not be a physical place like Haran. He may not be telling us to pack up and move where you go, but sometimes he does. We have some people here who have recently made a move. It's not an easy trip, right? Some work that goes into that. It could be a comfortable job that you've outgrown. Maybe God has grown you there, and he's saying, hey, I've got something else for you. It's hard to leave the comfortable. It could be a toxic relationship. As strange as that sounds, we as people are so programmed to fear the unknown that we'll choose to stay in something we know is bad because we know about it. It's the evil we know. It's comfortable. We already know what to expect, even if it's toxic and just outlandish and chaos. Rather than step into the unknown, we tend to stay with what we know. Maybe it's the unhealthy habit we have. We haven't been able to give up. Nicotine addiction, alcohol addiction, drug addiction, gambling. There are a lot out there. Maybe it's just that little bit of sin we haven't been able to beat yet, one that just continuously shows up in our lives and we can't seem to get rid of it. The call would be, give it up to God. We alone can't beat these things, but with the strength of Jesus Christ, we can. He can support us. He can be our strength in those times. But he just calls us to do it. We have to step out into faith without having the answers and believing that God is going to carry us through it. Not that he's not going to give us pain or allow us to struggle or allow us to see trials, but that he will carry through whatever waits down the path. And Abram's story is a powerful example of faith, but it's not the only one. It's not an isolated incident. I can look around and see examples of steps of faith here today, and there are a lot in the Bible. We're going to start with Moses. Anybody know about Moses? Heard the name before, right? He's in Genesis 2. So his step of faith, he spent 40 years in the wilderness hiding from Pharaoh because he had killed an Egyptian, right? He was slow of speech, had a speech impediment of some sort. Definitely didn't feel qualified to be a leader. And then, what seems illogical to us, God came to Moses in a burning bush and said, hey, I want you to go talk to Pharaoh, the most powerful man on earth at that point, and tell him he's going to let my people go. Moses said, well, hold on, I'm slow of speech. And God said, that's okay, I got something for that. Here's your brother Aaron, he speaks just fine. And with some hesitation and some jargon, Moses answered that step of faith. And through it, he got to see God's mighty hand, right? He did what God told him to do. He stepped out in faith. Through that act of obedience, he saw the plagues brought forth. The Egyptians' mind changed. They even gave them all their stuff. They were giving them gifts, saying, get out of here, go. Let me give you some stuff to encourage you to go. What they clung to so tight before, through an act of obedience, they were told, go on, get. And they saw the Red Sea parted. That's incredible. It's a pretty big body of water. And to have a nation, not just a couple people, an entire nation walk across that on dry land, man, that's a testament to faith in God and God showing up and proving that he is faithful. What about Noah? That's another one. Anybody know the name Noah? Noah's a righteous man in a wicked generation. The world is wicked and corrupt. And God says to Noah, I want you to build an ark, a giant boat, in a place where it has not rained. He said, it's going to flood. Noah has no idea what the mechanics of a flood would entail. We don't have to look very far. I mean, we've had a lot of floods here lately, right? Water coming over the banks, the water's brown, it's fast moving, things are washing down with it. Noah's not sure. But Noah was faithful. Noah believed that God was going to carry him through it, and he believed he should act in obedience. It says, so Noah did these things according to everything that God commanded him, so he did. He didn't question the science behind the flood. He didn't succumb to the mocking. I mean, you imagine this guy in the middle of a desert place building a giant boat. Hasn't rained. Maybe there's some mist that waters the vegetation, but no big storms. At some point, it gets big enough that people can see. And they're going to be walking by. And if you're building a boat out here in the middle and saying you're about to set sail, we kind of talked about this last week, right? There are going to be some sarcastic comments. Some people are not going to be so sly, and they're just going to call you outright crazy. No, he didn't worry about them. He said, I'm doing what God has for me. And he was blessed because of it. And we were all blessed because of him, because we come from that generation. He saved all the living creatures on earth, and he gave us a way to continue on. When after Moses, he didn't quite make it to the promised land, right? We're all flawed. We make mistakes. Those mistakes have consequences. So then came Joshua. Joshua was tasked with carrying the people to the promised land. His first big obstacle, the Jordan River. Much like the Red Sea, but this time it's in flood stage. Through the whole harvest season, the river says it flows over the banks. And defying logic, how do we address rivers if we need to cross them? Take a boat, build a bridge, try to go around it, find a shallow spot. Instead, God says, you have your priests, and they take up the ark. They're going to walk into the water, and they're going to stand still. And that whole nation is going to cross the Jordan. Man, if we're relying on our own understanding, I don't know if I'm getting behind that. You're going to stand there and let me walk into a fast-flowing, probably a torrent. It's flooding, moving quick. But they acted in obedience. They picked up the Ark of the Covenant. The presence of God was with them. They stepped into the water, and they stood still. And the water stopped above them, and the water stopped below them, and the whole nation walked through. And if that wasn't crazy enough, Joshua goes to Jericho. God says, I'm going to deliver this city into your hands. And I'm sure Jericho's excited, or Joshua's excited. I've got God on my side. We're about to take this city. I don't know if any of you are military history buffs, but there are a lot of things they would do. If I'm about to try to take Jericho, I'm grabbing siege engines. We're blocking off the entrances. We're camping out days and nights, cutting off their supplies, tainting their water supply if we can. We're going to do everything we can with military strategy and logic and understanding of the situation to take them. God says, nah, just go walk around the city walls, play your trumpets. Do that for 6 days. On the seventh day, give a shout, and I'm going to deliver the city to you. Jericho was a pretty fortified city. I'm sure they had things on top to handle problems outside. Leaning on our own understanding, I don't know if I would have marched baseless around Jericho. But you know what God did? He met them in their obedience, and he delivered Jericho to them. The walls came tumbling down. You remember that song? I'm not going to sing it to you because that wouldn't be great. But going on in military strategy, what about Gideon? Gideon's family was the least in Manasseh. When God came to him, he was threshing wheat in a wine barrel. Probably didn't feel like a whole lot. He was the lowest of the low. He's out here threshing wheat so that it didn't get taken by the Midianites, because they were just out here ravaging everything they had. Kind of that same theory you thought when you were taking over Jericho, right? You take what they got and you starve them out, and it's a war of attrition. So God comes to him and says, you're a mighty warrior. Some translations, you're a valiant warrior. That would build me up. And he has 32,000 soldiers at his command. So he's like, hey, come on, we're going to go and get these Midianites. But God knew that even though the odds seemed stacked against him, with 32,000, these proud Israelites would take the credit for routing that battle. If they won with 32,000, they'd be like, look what we did. How often does God bless us, do something through our lives, and instead of saying, praise God, look what God has done for me, let me tell you about what Jesus has done for me, we say, man, I did that. I'm pretty smart, huh? Kidneys, I got them. That might not be the spot for kidneys. But so God says, okay, I'm going to make sure they know that I am the one delivering you from this. So he says, you go out and you tell the men, anyone who is scared can turn and go home. The ones who are worried about the outcome of this battle, go home. Gideon took a step of faith and he said, okay, I'm going to do it. How many do you think were scared and went home? 22,000. So now he's down to 10,000 men. No question. If 10,000 men overcome 135,000 men, God did that. The one true God. He led them against that. But God says, well, hold on now. I got to make sure you know I'm in it. So why don't you take your men down to the water and let them drink? And the ones who kneel, you send home. The ones who lap the water from their hand like a dog, those are the ones you're going to take with you. How many of you lap water like a dog? Probably not going to be a high number of those men that lapped water, huh? It wasn't. 9,700 of them went home. Gideon was set to face 135,000 Midianite soldiers with 300 men. And did they have shields, armor, all that good stuff? No. They had trumpets, they had a torch, and a vase to cover it. And they went out and they routed 135 Midianite soldiers. God caused a confusion across the camp. They were attacking each other, and they just turned and ran from 300 men with torches and trumpets. Tell me that's not God. There was no question. Not one of them could have claimed the success of that battle. They could claim an act of obedience, and through that, God showed up. So in the end, God was the source of those blessings. And I've got one from the New Testament. I feel like it's one that kind of just resonates with our lives a little bit, because often, a step of faith isn't just one big grandiose step. It's not just, I did it, God, and now God takes care of everything. The one step into the unknown leads us up to the next step, which is, guess what? Into the unknown. God knows. We don't know. So imagine you're the disciples. You're on the Sea of Galilee. There's a raging storm around you. You see someone walking on the water. At this point, the disciples realize that that's Jesus. They're like, oh, man, this thing is going nuts. But here is Jesus walking on water. And Peter cries out with a burst of courage, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. How does Jesus respond? One word. He said, come. In a momentary step of faith and an act of courage, concerned about nothing but Jesus, Peter steps out of the boat. And he's on water, defying the lies of physics, the Newtonian laws, everything we would know and understand he defies. He's looking at Jesus. He's walking on water. And then, like so many of us, he got distracted by what was going on around him. He took his eyes off of Jesus, and that step of faith that went away. He fell into the water. Of course, Jesus pulled him out and rescued him. But for that one glorious moment, in the midst of that step of faith, he was gazing upon Jesus and defying the laws of physics. I think sometimes that's us. Sometimes we take the big step and we forget to take the next step. Or we get distracted, and we live in a world where there's nothing but distractions. If you want to be distracted, all you got to do is open your eyes and look around. But how many of those examples seemed comfortable? We're talking about a call to leave the comfort. None of those were comfortable. Most of them weren't in a comfortable position to begin with, and the step that they were called to was certainly less comfortable than the position they were already in. But God calls us to do that. He calls us to leave our comfort. Anybody go to the gym in here? We got any gym heads? How do you build muscle? It's not by leaving it comfortable. If you do the things that do not cause discomfort, you will never build an ounce of muscle. In fact, you may lose some. because you've got to stress it. You've got to test it. You've got to tear portions of it. Don't tear the whole thing, but you have to break pieces of it down so they can grow back and return stronger. And I think that kind of parallels to our relationship with God, right? We had to realize we are broken. We've been torn down, and then we can be built up through him as we come to know him. I have an illustration today that's a little personal. I wanted to share my step in faith. We're going through some big changes recently, and I just hope that it glorifies God and encourages all of us to look and listen for him and to respond in obedience. So for about the last year, we've been looking at schooling options for Sophia. She's coming up on going to kindergarten. It's a big step. We've looked at private school, considered public school because that's the most affordable option. I think we had glazed over homeschooling, but not a real big, we both work full-time jobs. Not a big option in our wheelhouse. So we had settled on public school. We had done that. That's what's going to happen come August. Sophia's going to be enrolled. She's already signed the paperwork. She's going to be in UK Castle. Around the same time, I've been looking at whether or not it was time to leave my job. Some things were getting rough. I didn't like the way some things were changing. So I'm like, well, maybe it's just time for me to leave, because when things get hard, do we stick it out or do we leave? It's real easy to leave, right? That's the best. Let me get away from it. Well, it turned out God didn't have that plan for me yet, but I discussed it with people and we talked about it. I'm like, man, maybe I'm going to go. And interestingly enough, things got better before we made this decision. It was a great place to work now. The problems that existed are gone. The money's back. The customers are happy. We're making, as long as you work, you're making money hand over fist. You may not be getting rich, but you're getting over efficiency. And keep in mind, the place I work, in my mind, is a unicorn in the professional world. One, I'm comfortable there. We talk about a call to leave the comfortable. I've been there 12 years. I have seniority. He's made me the foreman. I got a good, cushy gig. Not only that, it's an open-air environment for Jesus. In a shop where you typically imagine a mechanic shop and there's people cussing and throwing wrenches and doing stuff. You walk into our shop, there's Christian music on. At some point, someone is discussing God. We're talking about verses we've read. We're sharing experiences with each other. We have Bible studies at lunchtime, morning prayer. It's otherworldly. I can't imagine being anywhere else and growing the way I've grown. And yet somehow I feel like God is calling me out of here. When it was bad, he said, no, stay. Now that it's good, I feel the call to leave. So we're discussing one night kind of the guilt we have when we tell people we're putting Sophia in public school. And not that it's a bad thing. I went to public school and I turned out, for the most part, fine, But there was something there. Something just didn't sit right. There was a stirring inside. And so we're talking about it. And Danielle mentions the prospect of homeschool. And I'm like, well, that's just not feasible. It's not realistic. And, we go over a budget pretty quickly just to see. And it's like, well, man, that could work. It might work. There's a chance. And about that same time, bam, I got the feeling again. Like maybe it's time to leave. But this time, it's not like I want to go talk about this with Jeremiah, or I want to go see what David thinks about leaving. It's urgent. It feels like something in me is saying, I've got something for you. So we make a soft committal, because I think we're all famous of that. And you say yes, but in your mind, you haven't quite made the decision yet, right? It's a tentative yes. We decide we're going to commit it to prayer, and we're praying, and I just don't feel led any other way. I'm still full of anxiety. It's a huge step. This is everything I know. It's become part of my identity to be a mechanic. And now to leave my job and stay home and homeschool my children, that's crazy. It's an upheaval. It's going to flip our lives upside down. So one night, interestingly enough, the night before I put in my resignation, I go to bed and I'm praying before bed, and I just feel despair in my heart, this yearning, and I'm just pleading with God. I want to follow your will. I want to make the decision that's best for my family. And I don't want to throw out the sheepskin and tell you to do a certain way, but Lord, if this is your will and this is the right decision and I feel that it is, just give me peace. Calm me down. Just make me feel confident this is what you want for me. And I woke up the next morning. It was like it was day 3 of vacation. I'm pretty sure my knees didn't pop when I got out of bed. I was confident in my direction. My anxieties were at ease. There's still a little fear there, but I was so calm about it. I got up at 5:30 that morning. Usually I try to crank it out until 6 if I can. I wrote my resignation, packed up the girls, head to work. As I'm on the way, Danielle sends me a Bible verse, and it was Mark 11:24. It was her verse of the day. Some random things she gets every day. And Mark 11:24 says, therefore I say to you, all things for which you pray and ask, believe that you have received them, and they will be granted to you. And I was encouraged. I'm like, this is an answered prayer. All right, God, I know I'm slow, but you've painted it out. I know this is you answering that prayer. And I guess God knows I'm a little slow and a little leaning towards disbelief sometimes. So when I got to work, we're starting the work day, and about 30 minutes in, Jeremiah comes over, and he has this pretty little piece of paper. It's got some pink gel pen on it. His wife writes him a verse every day to take to work with him. And he's like, Brandon, I just feel like you got to read this verse, man. Check it out. And I grab it. What verse do you think was on there? Mark 11, verse 24. Therefore I say to you, all things for which you pray and ask, believe that you have received them, and they will be granted you. That was it. Lunch break, I turned in my resignation. We're not looking back. There was an offer. They were really willing to work with me and say, we can work a 2-day schedule, 2 hours in the evening. It seemed tempting. After thinking and praying, I just felt like, God's not calling me to step halfway. He's not telling me to take a half a step. He's saying, believe in me, put your trust in me, and I've got you. So I told him, thank you, but I'm just going to commit to this 100%. And I just hope that encourages you. I hope that it, even for one of you, if it would cause your ears to listen for God's call and your heart to be obedient and answer that, that would really encourage me. And I don't know the rest of the story, just like Abram. It's unknown. I chose verse 4 for a reason. He heard the call. He stepped out. We have the benefit of knowing what happened, but in those moments when he was called, he had no idea what was coming. So I'm excited to share with y'all some of the ways God blesses me through this and what he's done. But I'd like to get back to Abram here. It was a call to leave the unknown, and this is going to bring us into point 2, trusting the promise, not the path. It was a call to leave everything comfortable. Guided solely by the promise and the presence of God himself. Not on Abram's understanding, but on God's. And what were the promises? We can go back to the verses. He said, to the land I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. A man at 75 years of age, he's not just promising him descendants. He's saying, I will make you a nation. Descendants upon descendants will come from you. And he had a barren wife. This seems pretty unreasonable to human logic, right? I mean, at 75 years, if they weren't able to conceive, what is the likelihood that they're going to have a child now? It's about that big. I don't know if you can see that. It's metric scale. Not good chances. He said, and I will bless you. And oftentimes we think of material blessings. Everybody, this was a blessing. And it is a blessing. When God gives you something material, you should still say, thank you, God. But I think this is divine favor. God is directly linking his blessings and his hand upon Abram's life. He says, and I will make your name great. How many of you know who Abraham is? Heard the song Father Abraham? Anybody heard that before you knew Jesus Christ? I'd heard it before I'd come to have a personal relationship with him. That name's pretty great. He's known among me. He was known back then. He's known now. The whole tribe of Israel came from him. So God held true to that promise. And he says, you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse you. That's a covenant between God and Abram right there. He's saying, hey, I'm going to give you protection and judgment. I'm going to directly link the way that people treat you to my response. How encouraging is that? You're setting out on a trip into the unknown, and God says, don't worry, however they treat you, I'm going to respond in kind. This is the creator of the universe, the one who is, the I am. He was there before, and he'll be there after. That's a big one. And I think the best one, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. And it's not hard to make that connection, right? If you know God today, you've been blessed through Abram. Through his son Isaac, then Jacob, the tribe of Judah. King David came from Judah. Jesus was from the lineage of David. There's our blessing. Revealed the path of redemption for us through Jesus. We might reach salvation and know him. But these were huge promises, big ones. And you can look at them and say these big promises made it easier for Abram to make the step. I don't think so. You can give me all the promises in the world. I'm going to struggle with my own understanding at some point and say, am I going to do this? But interestingly about these promises, it wasn't just, here they are, you can have them. There was a prerequisite attached, right? That imperative we talked about earlier. He had to get up and go. It required a radical, immediate decision to step out in faith and trust God. Maybe you're at a crossroads today. Maybe you've heard the clear call. Maybe you've had a gentle nudge. Sometimes it's that persistent push that we continually try to not to listen to. You've been moved on by the Spirit. Oh, man, not me. Maybe it's just to serve in a new way at church, to sacrifice yourself a little more. Maybe it's to forgive someone who hurts you or the ones you love. That's a tough one. Give that up. We like to hold on to that. We like retribution, revenge. I want the last word, right? Let me give you a piece of my mind. Maybe it's just to surrender your worry to God's care, right? God tells us to cast our worries on him, give it to him. He'll give us peace. We'll find rest. But just like Abram, when we take this step of faith, we have to trust the promise, not the path. Some promises God's given us I wrote down today. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 tells us to trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. There's a prerequisite there, right? He's going to make our path straight, but what do we have to do? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Not half our heart. In all of our ways acknowledge him, and don't lean on our understanding, but his. Our ways are not his ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. They are greater than ours, more than we can ever imagine. In Jeremiah 29, verse 11, he says, "For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for prosperity and not for disaster, to give you a future and hope." So God promises he's got plans for us. Do we know the plans? It says for I. That's the big I, the capital I. For he knows the plans he has for us. And we can take faith in that. Even when it's unknown, he already sees the end, and he's got plans to prosper us and to build us up and to call us closer to him. It says, "I'll never leave you nor forsake you." That's my personal favorite. In Matthew, he says, "Come to me all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." So when you think you don't have enough, when you think he's giving you too much, he tells you to come to me. Because alone we're not enough. But when we lean on him, he's going to carry us through these trials. And that brings us to the last point. Stepping out in faith means active obedience. He was called to leave his comfort zone. I don't remember my last point. He did that. When did he decide to take the step of faith? Was it when he got up and left? You could say so, but in reality, no. The act of obedience happened when he said, "I'm going to do it." Right, so it started up here. Yes, God, I will. But then he had to follow up. So then there's two acts real close together that we can't separate. The next one was actually doing it. It's one thing to say you'll do it. Your actions speak and resonate through that. I just want to share a couple of principles about the act of obedience and stepping out in faith. First off, it begins with a clear call. Right? I'm not up here saying, "Hey, go live an adventurous life." You know, on your own understanding or your own decision, go try something crazy and chaotic and new. That would probably end disastrous. I've done it a few times in my life. It doesn't end well. So it's not a blind leap into the darkness. It's not a whim for adventure. It almost always comes from hearing God's voice, whether it's through prayer, quiet contemplation, whether it's through a godly mentor, through his word when you're reading it and he meets us there. It always comes with a call from him, and it's a response to a divine invitation, a recognition that God is initiating something new in our lives, and that we need to take the step of faith and rely on him to do it. Then the second observation, it requires active obedience, not passive belief. Faith isn't just simply believing about God. There are a lot of people out here that believe there's a God, maybe not this God. You use the term God and it becomes generic in today's world, right? Yeah, there's a God. Yes, there's a creator. I can't argue against the point that random molecules could collide and make this, so there's something. It's not just believing. True faith is active trust. It's hearing God's command, taking a step out to do it, and believing that he alone is going to be the resource you need to get through it. He is going to provide. We can put our trust in him. It's the doing part of believing, not just believing. That's active obedience. Abram went. Noah did everything just as God commanded. Joshua crossed. Gideon attacked. Peter came. It's a tangible expression of our trust in God. The third point, it relies on God's promises and character, not our understanding. Abram didn't know the land, but he knew God's promise to show him. Noah didn't know about a flood, but he knew God was going to carry him through it. Faith trusts the character of God and his unfailing word, his never-failing promises. To step out in faith just means, okay, God, you've got this. I believe in you. I know that you're going to carry me through this. I'm not sure of what's going to happen, but I'm going to say yes. I'm going to do it because it relies on his character, which never changes and never fails, versus our character, which you're at a whim. If you catch me, one day I'm faithful and the next half a second I'm not. It embraces the uncertainty and the unknown. It's our nature to want to know. We seek out knowledge. We want to understand the path that's going ahead. We do all this research. How many of you like to look at reviews before you buy a product? There's a lot of people that will spend more time reading the reviews for the product than they do using the product. We like to know. But when we're stepping out in faith, we don't always know. God just calls us to do it. For anyone who's a fan of 2 Corinthians, it means walking by faith, not by sight. You're not always going to see what's coming. And it often involves risk or discomfort. It's not going to be an easy step out. Leaving what's familiar, confronting giants, building an ark. All of those were not comfortable, risk-free endeavors. None of that was like, I go do it and it's going to be successful and you're going to be great, right? It called us to leave the comfort zone and to sacrifice our security, maybe your reputation, your personal ease. The path of faith is rarely the path of least resistance, but it is going to be the path of most reward in God's economy, not in what we determine rewards, but in eternal rewards. And last, it leads to God unveiling his faithfulness. That's the culmination of all of it, right? That step of faith leads to God showing us he is faithful. He opened the Red Sea. He brought down the walls for Jericho. He gave victory to the few. He enabled Peter to walk on water. When we step out in an act of obedience, when we are obedient to God, it's not that he becomes faithful. Our obedience doesn't mean, okay, now God says I can be faithful. It puts us in a position to where God can reveal his already existing faithfulness to us. Because we were obedient, he met us in our obedience, and then you get to see him work, right? Abram left and became many nations. Moses built the ark. I don't know for sure. I think maybe he forgot to think of a way to close the door. And when the floods came, guess who closed the door? It wasn't Noah. God closed up the door. So God shows up in our obedience, and he reveals his promise of faithfulness to us. It makes it clear. So I think we should ask ourselves today, how can we step out in faith? Clearly, it's not something you just do. You don't just decide, I'm going to step out one day. First off, it involves a call from God, right? God's got to be telling you to do it. If you're doing it on your own, how many times have we done something on our own? It usually doesn't work out well for me. Maybe it's forgiving somebody that wronged you. That's a tough one. I struggle with forgiveness. I'll take a grudge and carry it with me all day long. I'm good at hiding it, though. Sometimes I'll put it in my pocket. I'll smile to your face. But I've got it inside somewhere. Is that hurting you? Not at all. It's hurting me. It's damaging me on the inside. It's stopping me from being able to be what God has called me to be when I'm interacting with you. Maybe it's just sharing God. Family, friends, colleagues. That could be a step in faith, right? It's a daunting task to share Jesus with somebody sometimes. We're afraid of rejection, and we're afraid of saying the wrong thing. How many of you have started to share about God and then felt like, I don't have all the answers? I have. Guess who does? God. And if you start sharing, he's going to provide something for that situation. Maybe it's just to address a difficult issue, to give sacrificially, to step into a new leadership role, or maybe even break that long-standing sinful habit that we couldn't do on our own. Maybe the reason we weren't succeeding is because we haven't given our worries or our cares to God. Maybe we haven't turned it over to him yet, because his strength will carry us through it. It may not be an easy path. It may not be a path of no pain, but he'll carry us through it. It's not always about the grand, dramatic gestures. I used a lot of stories here that are just big, eventful things. They're awesome. They're exciting. They're encouraging. When I was reading them, when we were thinking this step, all these stories encouraged me to trust God. If he can do these great things, he can handle my situation, which seems great to me, but in reality is fairly small. But it goes smaller than that. The step of faith could just be, hey, Tara, I go to church at Edward Avenue. It's 222 Edward Avenue. Easy address to remember. I'd love to see you there Sunday at 10:30. Or when something great happens at work, the step of faith could be, instead of saying, yeah, I did that, it's praise God. Thank you, God, for giving the ability to do that. Thank you, God, for showing that to me. It could just be simply saying, yes, Lord, I will trust you with this. Whatever it is, whatever uncertainty you have, starting with, yes, God, even though I don't see the whole picture, I'm going to trust you and your faithfulness. Praise team, if you want to come up, I'm going to start to close out. Just as Abram left Haran without knowing where he was going, we're called to trust God's leading in our lives. He doesn't always show us the whole path. He doesn't always illuminate every turn, every obstacle. We're not going to have the GPS directions. But he promises to be with us every step of the way. I think that's why my favorite promise, knowing that whatever the situation, whether I'm on the highest peak or in the deepest valley, I'm not there alone. God's going to be with us. And his promises ring true whether we're on the valley or on the mountain or in the valley. He is our shepherd that leads us beside still waters. and he takes us through the valley of the shadow of death. So I'd ask you again, what is God asking you to step out in faith today? What land is he showing you? If it's just a glimpse, even if it's a faint outline on the horizon, I would pray that like Abram, Moses, Joshua, Peter, that we would be willing to take that step in obedience, that we would be faithful to God and trust that he's going to carry it through us. His promises are unfailing, and so they support us to take that step. And when we do, we open ourselves to witness the power of God like we've never seen before. He meets us in our obedience. He reveals his faithfulness to us. He'll be there, and he'll change things in our lives that we could never have imagined by ourselves. And it also starts a journey, maybe the most significant journey, a journey where we live our lives walking hand in hand with the Creator, leaning only on his understanding and trust, following him to make our path straight. You guys, I guess I'll just open it up to prayer. This is my favorite place to be on Sunday, at the altar. I feel like I've got a chance to kneel down and talk with God, and I just feel like something about being in his house and being low and humble. I got a problem with pride sometimes, so I put myself on the ground and just be like, I'm nothing, God. Let me talk to you. So if you want to come up when they start the music and pray, if you don't know this faithfulness that we're talking about, if you don't know Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, that's a big step of faith right there. Understanding that you're a sinner, you can't do it alone, but through the faithfulness of God, we've been given a path to redemption, to sanctification, to dwell with to dwell with him forever. So if you would, come up and pray.